Preacher Volume 1, Gone to Texas, written by Garth Ennis and art by Steve Dillon. Alright, Preacher by Garth Ennis. This was on DC Comics' Vertigo imprint. It came out between 1995 and the year 2000. It spanned about 75 issues and was initially collected in 9 trade paperbacks. Garth Ennis, he's a very popular writer. I think his most popular books are his Hellblazer John Constantine run at DC Comics, as well as the Punisher run he did at Marvel, which was the basis for the Tom Jane Punisher movie, as well as The Boys over at Dynamite Comics, which was adapted by Amazon Prime right now, and Season 2 is going to be coming out soon. But I think his most popular work, the work that finally won him an Eisner for Best Continuing Series, is Preacher. It's a very interesting, unique story about this preacher that somehow gets the word of God, and it has the ability to control people, and God has abandoned heaven, and the preacher is going to go look for God and get some answers. It's a very sacrilegious, controversial, edgy, sexual, violent book, and that's kind of what makes it exciting. That's what makes Garth Ennis interesting, is because he does push that envelope. Preacher was adapted into a TV series by AMC. It had 4 seasons. I thought the TV show was not too bad, but if you really want to experience Preacher, you gotta go through the comics, so that is what we are going to do here, and I plan over the next few months to go through the entire series. So let's dive into Preacher Volume 1, Gone to Texas. Issue 1, The Time of the Preacher. Before we begin the story, let me introduce our 3 main characters. There's Jesse Custer, a small-town reverend in Texas. He will soon be fused with an entity known as Genesis, giving him the word of God, forcing people to do whatever he says. There's Tulip O'Hare. She is Jesse Custer's old girlfriend and is every bit as dangerous as he is. She's a crack shot with virtually any firearm. At this point in the story, they haven't been together for 5 years. Cassidy is an Irish vampire. He charms just about everyone with his exuberant attitude, rapacious wit, and open vampirism, and his love of life overall, but all this is merely a front for his dark secrets and even darker past. The issue opens, we are a little bit in the future here. The 3 of them are in a small diner called the Five Aces Diner. Jesse is discussing how he is going to try and find God. They don't know where to start their search. Tulip says that the way she hears it, there are 2 places you can look for God, in church or at the bottom of a bottle. Jesse, being a reverend, says, maybe I'll go find a liquor store then, cause let me tell you, it sure as hell ain't the church. They order some food. Jesse orders a cheeseburger. Cassidy orders nothing because he's a vampire, doesn't eat food really. Tulip orders a chicken salad. Hold the chicken. She's a vegetarian now. Jesse comments that that's new. And Cassidy, making fun of Tulip, says, but it figures. If you ask politely, they might make you a nice cabbage and peanut quiche. Here, I've got a brilliant recipe for quiche. You make the quiche, right? And then you cook it. And then you throw the stupid frickin' thing out the window and you grill yourself a T-bone and eat that instead. Tulip asks Jesse to explain what's been going on. What's this Genesis thing and the angels and so on? Tulip also wonders what Jesse is even doing as a minister in the first place. He ran out on her 5 years ago. She expected to see Jesse drinking, doing drugs, and banging girls, not being a preacher in a small town in Texas. Well, Jesse explains that he figures he should start at the beginning of the story. Okay, so we're gonna jump back in time a bit and continue to build back up into this moment in the Five Aces Diner. So we're back in time. We see Jesse is a preacher in the small Texas town of Anvil. He goes down to the local bar on a Saturday night. He's a little drunk. He starts calling out the various people in town for being sinners and hypocrites. He knows because he hears their confessions. He tells the bartender Leonard that he's watering down the drinks. He tells the farmer Harvey that he is taking advantage of the government grants he gets and is exploiting it. Harvey says, "It's all above board, Reverend." And Jesse responds, "What about that straight-to-video porn that Kate shot in your barn of her having sex with a horse?" Jesse then turns his attention to these two other guys and he says, Pat and Terry Morrow, they raped a girl and got away with it because their daddy bribed the judge. Jesse says, I see you every Sunday, the few of you that bother to show up. You sing a few hymns and act like savages the rest of the week. You're driving me insane, and I'm here to tell you that ain't the way it works. Jesse then gets hit in the back of the head by Terry with a pool stick. They then begin kicking Jesse, and the bartender Leonard tries to come to Jesse's defense. Alright, now we jump to heaven. This part is a little confusing because Garth Ennis's version of heaven is not fully explained. He kind of just throws you into the deep end and you gotta figure everything out. So we see these three angels. They are looking outside of some sort of broken structure in the sky, and they say, I reckon Genesis broke out of here. The three angels are Fior, Pilo, and DeBlanc. Now these angels are something called a Defi. A Defi are a class of angel in heaven who are the administrators and bureaucrats of heaven. They are in charge of keeping Genesis confined after God left. DeBlanc asks, have you told anyone about this at all? Pilo says, not a soul. DeBlanc continues, because the last thing we need now is for the Seraphi to find out. Now we see the Seraphi did indeed find out. Now the Seraphi are another class of angel. They are a servant of God, and they are the warrior angels of heaven. They patrol the borders between heaven and hell. The Seraphi angel is yelling at the Adefi angels. He is holding his dead brother, and he says, this used to be my brother. An hour ago we were circling in the stratosphere when your entity, referring to Genesis, came charging out of the rising sun and did this to him. What are you going to do about it? Fior asks, you're saying Genesis did this? And the Seraphi answers, yes, the crossbreed whelp you Adefi fops were meant to be looking after. A comet with the face of an infant, Genesis. The Seraphi angel says, you bunch of sycophants had better get Genesis back before it causes any trouble down on Earth. Start now and just remember who's in charge around here. Alright, so we've been introduced to these two classes of angels, the Adefi, the bureaucrats, and the Seraphi, the warrior angels. But what is this Genesis they keep referring to? So, previously, one of the Seraphi angels met a demon. The demon was beautiful, dark, and dangerous. And against the Seraphi's very nature, he went to her. And the demon and angel fell in love, and they mated, knowing that they were doomed by doing so. And their child was the being known as Genesis. Now, heaven and hell are at war with each other, and these two broke the rules when they fell in love, so they were killed because of this. Now, Genesis is the offspring of this angel and demon, and as soon as Genesis was born, everyone knew it was a terrible thing, because it was something that never happened before, a mix of demon and angel, a new idea. God himself fled heaven when this Genesis was born. He left the angels in charge. The Adefi were given the job of keeping Genesis caged, but they soon discovered that this was a nearly impossible task. And Genesis was a being of almost infinite power. So, the Adefi angels discuss what do they do. DeBlanc asks Fior, you studied it, what does it want on Earth? And Fior says, a soul. My examinations revealed that Genesis was developing an identification with human concerns, even the beginnings of a morality, which would have come from both the parents. It will attempt to bond with a fully developed consciousness, a consciousness with a soul. The angel says that they can't let that happen. If that thing achieves full sentience, the game is well and truly up for all of us. We need someone to go after Genesis, someone who never fails, who never stops. Fior is concerned and says, wait a minute, you can't mean. And DeBlanc says, we must, we've got to. DeBlanc gives Pilo a job. He is to go to Boot Hill and wake the Saint of Killers. Pilo is scared, he doesn't want to do that, but he must. Now, while all that was going on in heaven, and while Jesse was making an ass of himself at the local bar on Saturday night, Cassidy and Tulip now enter into the story. Cassidy was just on his way out of Dallas. He wanted a change of diet. Tulip was actually doing a contract hit, hired to kill some guy and take him out. Now, she sees her target in the back of a car on the street. She walks up to the window, pulls out her gun, and she fires on her target, but she ends up missing her target and blasting through her target's bodyguard sitting beside him. After she fires on her target, she tries to run from the scene of the crime. She is running down the street, and she sees this Cassidy driving a truck. Cassidy and Tulip do not know each other at this point in time. Tulip points her gun at Cassidy and she wants to steal his truck. Cassidy is not scared though. He is not giving up his vehicle. Tulip says, "Jesus, I gotta get out of here." Cassidy just laughs and tells her, "What the hell? Get in." Tulip gets in the passenger seat, and as Cassidy begins to get ready to drive off, he gets shot right in the head, which would obviously kill a normal person, but he is a vampire, so he will be fine, and he just continues to drive on, and the two of them drive off and start introducing themselves to each other. We jump over to that angel Pilo, the one that was assigned to go to this Boot Hill and wake up the Saint of Killers. Now, Boot Hill is the given name of many cemeteries, chiefly in the western United States. During the 19th and early 20th century, it was a common name for the burial grounds of gunfighters, or those who died with their boots on. So that is what Boot Hill means. Pilo walks to the resting place of the Saint of Killers. He opens the casket and says, "Awake," and the Saint of Killer awakens, but he shoots Pilo right in the head with his pistols. Pilo asks why. The Saint of Killer says, "Force of habit. Help you with something?" Pilo explains, "You have slept beneath this hill and waited, and now I have come. You are needed once again. A being has escaped from heaven and is coming to earth this night. Its name is Genesis, and it is mighty. It holds a power like unto that of God Almighty. It seeks to join the spirit of a mortal man, and if it succeeds, the two together will know the secret ways of paradise, as no other mortal has done. Together they could kill us all. Go now from this place and find it, and if it has indeed joined with the man, kill him." Pilo then slowly dies, and is upset that he is dying. He did everything right. He was an Adefi, one of the hosts of angels. He never thought about sinning. He did everything he was told, but now it all ends here with his brains blown out. He says, "What do you call that?" And the Saint of Killer, walking away, says, "A good start." Now, this Saint of Killers is a very mysterious character. His backstory will be revealed much later in the series. But essentially, he is an old gunslinger made into the Angel of Death. He brings death at God's will. He carries 2 guns, and they never misfire and never run out. Every shot would hit, and every hit would kill. He was put to sleep and awakened with this important mission to kill whatever human Genesis bonds with. Now back over to Jesse Custer. He wakes up from his drunken stupor the night before where he pissed off the entire town, and he heads to church to give his sermon. The church was more packed than usual. Jesse figures word around town of him losing his mind the night before maybe had everyone interested to see if Jesse would do something crazy like jerk off on the Bible or something. Jesse, he begins giving his sermon and speaking when all of a sudden, Genesis, this force we've been hearing about, comes blasting down from the sky, and it busts right through the church door, and it begins to try and possess Jesse. And through this process of possessing Jesse, Genesis releases an explosion of energy that destroys the church and kills nearly everyone inside. We see Jesse has been taken over by this Genesis, symbolized by the part angel and part demon imagery surrounding him. We jump over to Tulip. She is with Cassidy still. and she sees this mushroom cloud explosion coming from the distance. And this is the explosion at the church. And she wants to drive over and check it out. So they start driving to it. Tulip and Cassidy are going down the road. Cassidy is hiding in the back under some blankets because he doesn't want to get burned by the sun. At this point in time, Tulip does not know that he is a vampire. Now Cassidy, he does not want to go check out this explosion because it's daytime, but he can't do much to actually stop Tulip at this point. Tulip, she arrives at the destroyed church, and she walks through the debris and sees all the dead bodies. But then in all this debris, she sees Jesse Custer lying there, her old boyfriend, which she hasn't seen in 5 years. So she decides to save Jesse and pull him out of the debris and start trying to drive him to the hospital. Some time passes, and we see eventually Cassidy made her stop the car, and Tulip and Cassidy argue about what to do with Jesse. Tulip says she doesn't know why Jesse is dressed up like a minister, but he used to be her boyfriend. And Cassidy asks, "So you thought you'd drive him to the hospital in my truck, did you? And why used to be?" Tulip says that Jesse ran out on her, and Cassidy quips, "Oh, a nice girl like you?" They argue some more, but eventually Jesse wakes up. He screams, he says his head hurts. It's like his mind suddenly remembered all this shit, except it's not his memories. It's been shoved into his head from the outside. Now Jesse, he has visions of the Seraphi angel having sex with a demon. And Jesse says, "Christ, it hurts." His mind is telling him something, shit you wouldn't believe. It sounds like the word of God. Now while all this is going on, the police have arrived at Jesse's church and are investigating the destruction. We are introduced to a Sheriff Hugo Root. The sheriff is an abrasive, antagonistic character and a mean son of a bitch. The sheriff tells his deputy, Kenny, he thinks it was Martians that did this. He thinks the government and FBI aren't telling them everything. Kenny thinks that they should let the feds handle this though, especially before they start covering the country with guns. The sheriff doesn't think so though. He wants to handle this himself. So he's got a chopper coming in and every police officer that can be spared. Back to Jesse, Tulip, and Cassidy. Some time has passed and all of a sudden a police chopper starts hovering above them and Sheriff Root pulls up with several other police officers in tow. The sheriff says that these are the only folk we found in 50 miles, referring to Jesse, Tulip, and Cassidy. The police chopper tells them, "Hold it right there, boy. One more step and I'll blow your head off." Now Jesse, now sensing his new power, this word of God power, he says, "Drop the guns, all of you, and let us go." Now when Jesse uses this new word of God power, his speech bubbles are shown in red to signify he is using that power. Now these cops, because of Jesse's new word of God power, they have no choice but to obey Jesse's demands. So all the cops drop their guns. Jesse, he turns to Cassidy and says, "I gotta tell you, I'd sure as hell appreciate a ride out of here." Cassidy, which has been kind of against Jesse up to now, says, "Alright, I could do with some crazy shit in my life." Cassidy is a vampire after all. He's been alive for a long time. He's bored. He's down for some excitement. The three of them get in the truck and drive off. Sheriff Root is yelling at his men to pick up their guns, but of course, none of them can. Eventually, as the police are still standing there, the Saint of Killers shows up to the scene, walking towards them. The police, exasperated, say, "Looks like this is asshole night, armed asshole night. I figure you got yourself some guns in that belt, boy?" And the Saint of Killers responds, "Yeah, but you don't look to me like the man who will take them." Issue 2, and Hell Followed Him. In this volume we will experience the sheer force of will that is the Saint of Killers. We're jumping in time just a bit. We see Sheriff Hugo Root is explaining to this other sheriff, Sheriff Meeker, what happened on the scene between his men and the Saint of Killers. Also in the room is FBI agent Dennings. Agent Dennings was sent to this small Texas town to investigate the explosion at the church. Now Hugo Root, he explains what happened, and how all of his men's guns were on the ground, and the FBI agent is in disbelief that all the officers just dropped their guns and couldn't help themselves to pick them up. Hugo says that the mysterious gunslinger just started shooting at them. Now we jump back to the scene where issue 1 left off at, where the Saint of Killers is confronting the police. The Saint of Killers, he just starts blasting away at them all. Boom, 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 cops' heads just exploding. Some of the cops do manage to pick up their guns and fire back, and they are hitting the Saint of Killers, but it really has no effect on him. The cops can't believe it. They say he just stood there and took it. One of the other cops yells for his men to fall back. The Saint, he continues to blast away. A guy is shot in the neck, another in the back, one with his intestines hanging out. The Saint just kills almost all of them. Sheriff Root manages to walk out and tells the Saint of Killers that he is unarmed. The Saint doesn't care, but all of a sudden, the chopper starts firing at the Saint of Killers, so the Saint of Killers turns his attention to the chopper and shoots it, and it crashes down to the ground in a big explosion. Jesse, Tulip, and Cassidy, driving further up the road, see the explosion of the downed chopper, and they stop the car to take a look back. Jesse is staring down the road, and he sees the Saint of Killers walk through the flames, and he looks pissed. Jesse tells Tulip to get back in the truck. Now, they need to go. Alright, back to FBI agent Dennings and Hugo Root telling the story. Hugo Root explains that he ran a quarter mile down the road in the other direction, but the fire from the chopper lit up the road real good. He saw the truck take off as the gunslinger walked down the highway after them. FBI agent Dennings doesn't believe it. He also thinks that this gunslinger must have been firing magic bullets if he fired as many shots as he supposedly did. Sheriff Root says, "You didn't see this guy. You didn't see him stand his ground and get to work. These revolvers he had were antique Colts out of a museum, but he hits every shot he tries, and he takes his time to cook them hammers. He ain't in a hurry. He aims like you and me would point a finger. I saw my boys hit him with everything from solid slugs to double-aught buck, and he didn't frickin' twitch. Just came through us with a look like he was treading in dog shit rather than killing folks." Sheriff Root is dismissed and told to go home by Sheriff Meeker. Agent Dennings is asked his theory by Meeker, and Dennings says he thinks someone must have put 10 gallons of napalm in that church. Meeker says, "That's your theory?" And Dennings responds, "It's a theory. Gotta be better than Sheriff Good Ol' Boys, hasn't it?" Sheriff Meeker, talking about Sheriff Root, says, "Look, I know he looks like what happened when White Trash met." And Dennings cuts Meeker off and says, "He looks like a man who's not afraid to fuck his career in the ass. Any word on his men?" And Meeker responds, "Chopper crashed on the cars and all the tanks went up. Can't establish shit till they clean it up a little." Meeker asked Agent Dennings, "Did you hear what happened to Sheriff Root's boy?" And Dennings says, "Nah, he didn't." Well, Meeker explains that Hugo Root's kid was a huge fan of Kurt Cobain, the lead singer of Nirvana. Well, the boy, he loved Cobain. Cobain was his hero, even starts shooting heroin just to be like him. Well, one day, Cobain kills himself, blows his head off. Now remember, this issue was written in 1995, a year after Cobain's death, so it was really top of mind at this point in time. Well, Hugo's son wants to follow in his hero's footsteps, so he grabs his dad's gun and shoots himself in the face. Only he didn't die. 6 operations later, the kid is still alive, only he looks horribly disfigured. Sheriff Hugo Root arrives at home. and he is greeted by his teenaged son, the one that Meeker and Dennings were just talking about, the one that shot himself in the face. Well, his son's name is Eugene Ruth, better known as Assface, a reference to his horribly disfiguring appearance that makes it look like he has an asshole for a face. Whenever Assface talks, his word balloons are just gibberish, and it has to be translated in text boxes. The sheriff hates his son and sees him as a disappointment. Assface, all things being considered though, is a pretty nice kid. He asks his dad, "How was your day? Still no letter from Mom? But I bet she'll be home any day now. You want to relax and I'll bring you a beer? Sound good? You betcha?" Hugo sobs a bit in the living room, sad because his wife left and he is stuck with his loser son. We jump over to Jesse and Tulip. They are in the truck in the parking lot of a Shop-A-Rama store. They are talking. Tulip explains that she didn't come back to Annville to find Jesse. Jesse dumped her 5 years ago and she didn't even know he was here. Cassidy just happened to be heading that way is all. Jesse wonders about Cassidy and Tulip explains that he was just giving me a ride, nothing else, and I don't know why he sleeps all day in the back of his truck. So neither of them have figured out the vampire thing at this point. Jesse and Tulip then discuss Jesse's new apparent power that he used back there, using the word of God to control those cops. Tulip says, "I mean, they obeyed you as if your voice came from on high. It didn't matter that they didn't want to, you got the word." Pretty much for the rest of the series, they're going to refer to Jesse's power as the word. Tulip asks Jesse if he's getting any more messages from his head, and Jesse explains that it feels like it's becoming him. He thinks he's hearing its name. It's just one word repeated over and over again in his head, the word Genesis. Tulip comments that Genesis makes you think more of creation or birth, or the first book of the Bible. Cassidy perks up and adds, "Or a terrible band," referring to the 1970s band led by Phil Collins and Peter Gabriel, Genesis. Cassidy asks them, "Why haven't you bought Jesse his clothes yet? That's why we're here, aren't we?" Jesse says, "We got to talking is all." Cassidy says, "Well, we better go into the store and get you some clothes because Jesse's currently in these tattered rags he's wearing after the church explosion." Now Jesse, playing with his new power, tells Cassidy, "Stand on your head." Cassidy does so. He says, "This is dead funny, so it is, but don't do it again." And Jesse laughs, saying, "You got it." As Tulip and Cassidy head into the store to get Jesse some clothes, he's just smoking by the truck and he's waiting. But then he imagines the ghost of John Wayne talking to him. That's right, John Wayne, the famous American actor that primarily starred in westerns and military movies. John Wayne appearing to Jesse is going to be a recurring thing that's going to happen throughout this series. See, Jesse idolized John Wayne as a kid, and Wayne would sometimes appear at key turning points in Jesse's life, offering advice, support, and when necessary, criticism. John Wayne asks Jesse, "You see that son of a bitch that killed them lawmen last night?" Jesse responds, "Not likely to forget. I saw his eyes." John Wayne replies, "Well, them eyes stare down the devil. That bastard goes by the name of the Saint of Killers. He's got a soul so damn cold and rattlesnake mean, Satan himself threw him back out of hell. And he's looking for you, pilgrim. He ain't behind what's happened to you, but watch him." So it appears John Wayne here is perhaps some sort of ghost or hallucination, but it also seems he has some sort of rapport with this Genesis entity in Jesse's head and has some awareness of the outside world, and he is able to warn Jesse about the Saint of Killers. Cassidy and Tulip go into the store to buy Jesse some clothes. Cassidy is giving Tulip a hard time about Jesse. Tulip explains, "Look, I'm helping him because I want to know why he left me without a goddamn word and became a minister of some shithole in the ass end of Texas. And that's all. What's your excuse for helping him?" Cassidy answers, "Because I'm fascinated by him. You saw what he did to those cops, didn't you? If he can do that sort of thing on a regular basis, the sky's gonna be the limit." Cassidy begins fantasizing about all the weird things that Jesse can make strangers do for them. Plus, he whispers to Tulip, "I can't wait to see you try to explain to him that gun you've got in your handbag." We jump to heaven. Two Adefi angels, DeBlanc and Fiora, are discussing. DeBlanc has been drinking. He thinks they are so screwed. Fiora says the Saint of Killers has killed Pilo and 12 mortals already. And DeBlanc says, "I don't care if the body count reaches triple figures. We sent him because nothing will stop him from getting Genesis back." DeBlanc continues and explains why he's drinking. He says, "And I'm drinking because sooner or later the Grail are gonna hear about this." And Fiora says, "Oh shit, I think I need a drink." Now this is just a tease for the organization known as the Grail, which we will learn about much later. Back to Jesse, Tulip, and Cassidy down on Earth. They are having dinner somewhere, and Jesse tells them both, thanks for helping out for now. He appreciates it, but he's got that gunfighter after him now, and the cops too, and until he gets a better idea of what this Genesis wants, he thinks he should just go out on his own for now. Tulip doesn't want to leave until she gets answers on why Jesse left her years ago. Now the waitress comes back to the table to give them their change, and Jesse tells her, "Oh, just keep it." In the parking lot afterwards, Tulip, angry because Jesse gave away her last $5 to that waitress, she mimics Jesse saying, "Oh, you got a nice little ass, honey. You go on and keep Tulip's last $5. In the parking lot, as they're heading back to their car, some tough guys want to start some shit with Jesse. They don't like how Jesse was flirting with that waitress. Jesse is the kind of guy, though, that doesn't take shit from nobody. So he gets right in this guy's face that's talking to him, and before you know it, they all start fighting. Cassidy, he joins in on the fight and headbutts one of the guys in the face. Jesse punches another one out. All of a sudden, Cassidy gets stabbed in the eye with a knife. But it's no big deal to Cassidy. He just removes the knife from his eye, and then he bites through this guy's neck and begins drinking his blood. Jesse and Tulip are shocked because they did not know Cassidy was a vampire, although it is very apparent to them now, and Cassidy continues chowing down on this guy's neck, and he notices that Jesse and Tulip are staring at him, and then he asks, "Something the matter?" Issue 3 and the horse you rode in on. Up in heaven, Fiora and DeBlanc are talking about how fucked they are, and they are beginning to understand why God left, and they are pissed because technically the Seraphi were left in charge, but all the work is falling on them. DeBlanc is especially worried about what's going to happen when the Grail finds out about Genesis. He says, "Let's see the Seraphi deal with the Battle of Armageddon." Fiora replies, "The Grail couldn't start Armageddon, could they?" And DeBlanc says, "Couldn't they? They've got people everywhere, ears to the walls, fingers on buttons. All they want is an excuse to get started. After 2,000 years of preserving a single bloodline, they're bound to be a little impatient. Why do you think I sent Pilo to the Saint of Killers and to his most certain death?" Fiora asks, "You're not suggesting Pilo was a spy for the Grail, are you?" DeBlanc responds, "He was too eager for my liking, too clean-cut, too good to be true." Fiora says he was an angel of the Lord. What do you expect him to do, deal crack? Pilo wasn't a spy. And DeBlanc says, "Well, then he was just a little crawler and he deserved it anyway." "Don't worry about it, Fiora. We're all gonna get what's coming to us. Believe you me, the kingdom of heaven is fucked." Back to Jesse, Tulip, and Cassidy. Jesse and Tulip are staring at Cassidy. They put two and two together and figure out that Cassidy is indeed a vampire, and that's why he was hiding from the sun under the blankets earlier. Cassidy tells them who are they to criticize him. Like Jesse is Mr. Normal. Normal people don't have the power to make a dozen cops drop their guns. I don't know why you're acting so innocent, Tulip, with that gun in your handbag. There was a right wee shootout you were in the other night. Jesse turns to Tulip and wondering about this shootout and if it's true. Tulip points out that Cassidy is chowing down on that guy's neck again right now. Jesse, using the word power, says, "Quit it!" And Cassidy is forced to throw that body he was eating down on the ground. Cassidy is angry. He told Jesse earlier to not use that power on him anymore. He says, "Nobody tells me what to do, and I don't know if you noticed, but that shit stuck a knife in my eye." Jesse retorts, "That don't make him a $2 Slurpee, and I would have told you to go F yourself the minute I set eyes on you if I knew you were this abomination." Cassidy did not like being called an abomination. He takes that as a sign of disrespect, so he gets in his truck and drives on by himself. We see two cops leaving a nearby truck stop and heading to their police car. They see the Saint of Killers standing just outside their car, and he appears to be listening, trying to learn information about Jesse's whereabouts on the police radio. The Saint of Killers asks the cops, "You boys mind me listening to your radio a spell?" The police officers tell him, "You step away from that vehicle." The Saint of Killers blasts one of the cops right in his chest, dead, and he warns the other, "It's gonna be a massacre if you don't keep that iron in its holster." Elsewhere, Sheriff Meeker and FBI agent Dennings are investigating the aftermath of the fight Jesse and Cassidy had outside the bar. One of the fighters says, "One of the guys they fought was dressed as a reverend, and the other guy was biting into my friend's neck and drinking his goddamn blood." Sheriff Meeker, listening to this story, thinks it has some similarities to the story that old Sheriff Root was telling them. FBI agent Dennings thinks this is all ridiculous though. Another cop walks there over and says that they got a 911 call about 10 minutes ago, something about a shooting and someone saw that cowboy gunslinger guy. Sheriff Meeker, he asks to be patched through to Hugo Root because maybe he's not so crazy after all. We see Sheriff Hugo Root is at home with his son Eugene. When Hugo gets a call asking him to come in, Eugene wants to bond with his dad, so he sneaks into the back of his dad's police car to see what his dad gets up to. We jump over to Jesse and Tulip. They have checked into some shitty motel to sleep for the night. Jesse asks about the gun in Tulip's handbag. Tulip is not ready to talk about that though. She asks Jesse, "You ready to tell me why you left me to become a minister?" And Jesse says, "That's not so easy." Tulip is frustrated and says, "And if you and Cassidy hadn't started a fight with those pricks outside the bar, we wouldn't be stuck in this shithole motel." Jesse starts defending Cassidy though. He says, "It wasn't Cassidy's fault. I kind of regret what I said to him, you know. I called him an abomination. I never just stood in judgment like that on a fella before." Tulip says, "I think you had a good excuse. He's a monster, for Christ's sake." Jesse answers, I know. I had a feeling we could have been friends is all, and I think I hurt him. Anyway, the fight with those guys wasn't Cassidy's fault. The little fuck leading them called me an asshole, and I won't be spoken to like that, not by any son of a bitch alive." Tulip tells Jesse, "Psh, you haven't changed a bit, have you? You and your goddamn pride." We jump over to Cassidy. He arrives at the truck stop and sees the various dead cops on the ground after their confrontation with the Saint of Killers. Cassidy sees some blood coming out of the truck stop door, so he decides to go inside and check it out. Inside the truck stop, he sees a pile of dead bodies on the floor, and the Saint of Killers sitting at the bar. The Saint of Killers greets Cassidy by saying, "Howdy." Cassidy asks him, "What the hell did you do this for?" The Saint of Killers explains, "I'm keeping a promise to the fella outside. Figure it don't harm my reputation any either. Saint of Killers is what they call me. Saw you with that preacher I'm looking for, boy. Like to oblige me with his name? Anywhere I can find him?" Cassidy responds, "No point, mate. You won't be able to hear me. You'll be too busy screaming your head off when I pull your guts out through your asshole, you bastard." Cassidy punches the Saint of Killers in the face, and the Saint of Killers doesn't even twitch from Cassidy's punch, and we see Cassidy's hand is now all messed up. The Saint of Killers then blasts Cassidy in the chest with his revolver, and Cassidy goes flying back down to the ground. The Saint of Killers then drops a coin on the bar and heads out of the truck stop doors. Back to the motel, Jesse bangs his head on the bathroom cabinet, and that triggers Jesse to have more visions. He sees flames in the mirror's reflection in the bathroom. Jesse then tells Tulip that bang on the head was just what he needed. He sees everything now. This Genesis is telling him all about itself. Jesse now knows that Genesis was created by this angel and this demon that fell in love and had sex, and he thinks that this Genesis is as powerful as God Almighty. This Genesis was held in heaven after its birth, and Jesse thinks whoever was keeping it in heaven sent this Saint of Killers guy to get it back. So Jesse wants to talk to those people and learn this goddamn secret that they're hiding. So he's gonna try and track down this Saint of Killers to talk to him and get answers. Jesse, he finishes getting dressed and starts heading outside, and as soon as he steps out of the door, Sheriff Root is there and points his gun up to Jesse's head. The sheriff tells Jesse, knew you'd be sniffing around here. Now, Mr. Preacher Man, open that mouth, say one word, just tell me to drop this here gun, and I'll blow your goddamn brains all over your freaking whore girlfriend. Up in heaven, one of the other angels, known as Matthias, walks over to DeBlanc and Fior and tells them that Custer knows about the Saint of Killers. We're in shit. Issue 4, Standing Tall. This issue opens, we see a young Jesse Custer. He is 5 years old. His dad had recently died by getting shot in the head. Jesse is watching TV, a John Wayne Western. Jesse's a huge fan. All of a sudden, John Wayne appears to talk to Jesse, sort of like an imaginary friend. And John Wayne, right through the TV, tells Jesse, "Howdy, Pilgrim. You're probably wondering why I'm talking to you. Reason is, you and me, we're gonna be partners. Anytime you need me, I'll be here, son, because a man can use some advice in a world as rough as this one. Now, let's shake on it, partner." In the current day, Sheriff Root is pointing his gun at Jesse. Tulip then comes up from behind and points her gun at the sheriff. The sheriff then turns his attention to Tulip and tells her, "Take your shot, bitch, anytime." While all this is going down, we see Eugene is watching his dad from his dad's police car. We see Cassidy is driving his truck, still injured from his gunshot wound from the Saint of Killers. But remember, he's a vampire, he can survive this and heal, so long as he gets himself some fresh blood. Cassidy is pissed at this Saint of Killers dude, though, for shooting him, so his plan is to drive his pickup truck right through that bastard's ass. Back to Jesse, Tulip, and Sheriff Root. Sheriff Root and Tulip are still pointing their guns at one another, but then the Saint of Killers walks up to the scene. Sheriff Root knocks Jesse down with the butt of his gun, and then the sheriff turns his attention to the Saint of Killers and tells him, "Was hoping you'd show up, big man. I owe you for a dozen deputies." The Saint of Killers says, 14. The sheriff gets ready for a standoff with the Saint of Killers, and he tells him, "Go on, pull those pistols, you son of a bitch." The Saint of Killers stares the sheriff down. The sheriff starts to regret his words and says, "I've changed my mind." But before they can duel, though, Cassidy with his pickup truck is driving full speed right at the Saint of Killers and crashes right into him. The Saint of Killers just stands there, not even budging, as Cassidy goes flying through the windshield and lands right by Jesse. Jesse asks, confused, "Cassidy?" Cassidy jokes, "Cheer up, preacher man, you're rescued." The Saint of Killers turns back to Sheriff Root and says, "About them pistols?" The sheriff, really not feeling confident anymore, says, "That ugly fellow there just drove a truck into you. Ain't you pissed at him at all?" And the Saint of Killers replies, "Him and the preacher both got it coming. After you." All of a sudden, Eugene, who's been watching this all go down, fearing for his dad's life, gets out of the cop car and starts running right in the middle of the action and says, "Don't kill my dad." Everyone freezes. Sheriff Root is embarrassed in his son. Cassidy says, "Hey, that fella's got a face like an ass." Jesse then uses his word power and yells, "Enough!" He tells the Saint to put his guns back in his holster. The Saint is forced to do it. He even has to listen to Jesse. The Saint tells Jesse, "I'm gonna kill you." Jesse says back, "Well, maybe someday you will, but not right now. Right now, I'm calling the tune and you're dancing for me, you murdering son of a bitch. If I say shit, you say what shape, Reverend Custer?" Now the guys that sent you, I figure they're the ones that'll tell me what I need to know. Then Jesse, using the word, says, "Get them here now." Then the Saint of Killers turns away from Jesse and says, "You heard him. Get down here or I'll kill my way across half of creation." One of the angels then appears in a huge form and says, "Then behold, O mortals, the glory of the heavenly host." Jesse, using the word, says, "Cut the shit, will you?" The angel, DeBlanc, then appears in his regular, less impressive form. Jesse asks him, "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" DeBlanc answers, "I am DeBlanc, first among the Adephai, who sit at the left of heaven's throne, angel of the Lord our God." Jesse, using the word, says, "Tell me the truth. Let's start with the big secret you're so keen on keeping. Don't be shy." DeBlanc, being forced to obey, says, "They'll kill me for this. It's the Lord our God. He quit. He's gone. He came to us one day, all of his angels, and he said that he had to go on a journey to Earth. He left straight away, and he hasn't been heard from since. He left heaven in the charge of the Seraphi, the warrior angels who sit at the right hand of his throne. We Adephai are scientists, lesser angels. Actually, we do all the real work, but the long and short of it is, he quit." Jesse asks, "How the hell can God quit?" DeBlanc answers, "That's what I thought, but here we are. He's gone and nothing's changed. No apocalypse, no lion lying down with the lamb. The 4 horsemen are still in the stable." And Jesse asks, "How long has he been gone for?" DeBlanc answers, "Since Genesis. The very instant it was created, that's when he left, and in quite a hurry too. And we had to take care of the whole mess ourselves, killing the parents, imprisoning the bloody thing." Jesse says, "'Cause you couldn't let something that powerful out, could you? Someone might use it to find out your big goddamn secret." And DeBlanc answers, "Yes, well, I think you'll agree that was a pretty legitimate concern, but now that you found out our secret, who's really gonna believe you? You've got the same problem we always have. The atheists start telling people God's not here, and you'll get the same blank stares you got when you say he was." DeBlanc tells Jesse, "It's not too late to fix all this. We can isolate the Genesis entity from your soul. We know how to. Come on, you can't just wander the world with a power as strong as the Lord's." And Jesse asks, "It's as strong as him, huh?" I reckon you're right. No one's going to believe any of this unless they hear it from the Lord himself. You know what? I'm going to go looking for him. And I don't care how long it's going to take or where I have to go. I'm going to find him, and I'm going to make him tell his people what he's done. Jesse then, using the word, tells DeBlanc and the Saint of Killers, "Get lost." The Saint of Killers says, "I'll be seeing you," as he walks away. Sheriff Root says, "I'll be leaving myself, if you don't mind." Jesse says, "No, we are leaving." And using the word power, he tells Sheriff Root, "You are gonna go fuck yourself." In the aftermath of this confrontation, Sheriff Meeker and FBI agent Dinnings show up to the motel that they were at. Apparently, Sheriff Root is in an ambulance. One of the paramedics is talking to Eugene and tells Eugene that his dad apparently severed off his own penis and stuck it in his colon. It's too late for surgery, but he's stable. So Jesse told this Sheriff Root to go fuck himself, and he literally did. Sheriff Root from the back of the ambulance calls for his son, Eugene. Eugene is excited to finally get some attention from his dad, so he runs over excited, and his dad asks Eugene to bring him his gun belt. Eugene does so, and Sheriff Root then uses his gun to shoot and kill himself. Eugene then runs away screaming, "No, Dad!" And everyone else is kind of shocked. Later on, we see Eugene on his knees screaming, "I will have vengeance on Jesse Custer, vengeance for the blood of my father, and if I have a face like an ass, so be it. I will become Assface." We see in heaven, the Seraphi are banishing DeBlanc and Fior to Earth for their failures. DeBlanc curses them as he is being sent away. We see Jesse, Cassidy, and Tulip. They've been hitchhiking for 2 days and arrive at the Five Aces Diner. So we are now catching up to where the three of them were at the beginning of issue 1. So Jesse, Tulip, and Cassidy head into the diner, but before Jesse reaches it, he imagines and sees John Wayne appearing out of nowhere. John Wayne throws Jesse a big shit-eating grin, so Jesse turns around and throws it right back. Now with that is the end of the first story arc. We have now set up the characters and the overarching trajectory of the story. Jesse's on a mission to find God, and Tulip and Cassidy are along for the ride. Now this first volume does have a second story arc, and that one begins in issue 5, Naked City Part 1, Say a Prayer for 7 Bullets. This issue opens in New York City, and we see a John Toole. He is an African-American New York City cop, and very possibly the worst one. He is clumsy, socially inept, and generally prone to making mistakes and screwing up. He was also born with one testicle, which simply adds insult to injury. So this John Toole, he's running down an alley chasing a suspect, and the suspect manages to get the upper hand on John, pointing his Uzi at him. John freezes, but luckily his partner is there to shoot the suspect in the face and save John. John's partner is Paul Bridges. Paul is the exact opposite of John. He is basically the guy they modeled Dirty Harry after, the kind of guy that would be played by Schwarzenegger in the movie if they made one. He's a super cop. Paul arrives and grabs the other suspect that was trying to flee up the fire escape, and he roughs him up and makes him choke on his gun by shoving it in his mouth. They get their arrest, and these two street criminals were dealing drugs. John tells Paul that he's being a little bit rough with the suspects, and Paul tells John that he's being a little bit of a pussy. Across town, we see some torture taking place by a vicious, mysterious serial killer named the Reaver-Cleaver. The Reaver-Cleaver is torturing this victim and has removed the victim's face and is taunting his victim with it. The Reaver-Cleaver says, "It's okay, I'll put it back on," grabbing a box of nails. We jump back over to Jesse, Tulip, and Cassidy. They have hitchhiked their way across America out of Texas and made their way to New York. They are discussing their next move. Jesse is now a wanted fugitive. He's a suspect in that church explosion as well as those various other deaths that happened back in Texas. Cassidy has an old friend coming to meet them in New York here. This friend is a freelance journalist, a little bit of a conspiracy theory nut. He's obsessed with weird shit like ghosts and flying saucers, and he potentially might have some information that will help Jesse find God. Cassidy explains he likes religious phenomena best, weeping statues, stigmata, visions of the Virgin Mary. The Lord maybe showed up in some of the stuff he collects. I can ask him about it without coming right out and saying what we're up to. So they want to get some information out of Cassidy's friend without telling Cassidy's friend exactly who Jesse is. So Cassidy's old friend arrives, and his name is Cy Coltrane. Cy and Cassidy have a big hug hello. They get to talking, and Cy is introducing himself, explaining that he is living the dream of the freelance journalist. He lives in a cheap apartment filled with empty beer bottles, has angry editors calling him at all hours about deadlines, and he loves it. He tells them that he is working on this news story about this serial killer, this guy called the Reaver-Cleaver. He explains how the killer got his name. About 2 weeks ago, some guy kidnapped some people and sent identifiable bits to their relatives, stuff like hands and jaws and things like that. Well, someone in the news called the guy the Reaver, but then some other guy over at the Post called the guy the Cleaver, and neither paper gave in, so he ended up being called the Reaver-Cleaver. After some time passes, eventually they all leave the bar and start walking down the street. Cassidy and Cy are walking in the back and they're discussing things. Meanwhile, Jesse and Tulip are walking up ahead. Tulip comments that Jesse and Cassidy got awfully friendly awfully quick. Jesse explains that he likes Cassidy. They both have the same sense of humor. Jesse, he tries to apologize to Tulip for some of their past misunderstandings they were having. He says, I didn't mean to start up with you about what you were doing in Dallas and the whole thing with the gun, and I'll explain why I left you before soon, I promise, but it's kind of hard because it has to do with some stuff I don't like talking about, okay? Tulip says she understands. That sounds reasonable. Meanwhile, Cy and Cassidy are talking in the back. Cassidy is pretending that he's the one interested in all this info on God as a way to avoid arising suspicion from Cy. Cy eventually announces to the group that he's gotta leave now. He's got a ton of stuff to do, but he'll look into the God stuff for Cassidy and see what he can find on the internet and get back to them. They all say goodbye, and this is kind of funny. Remember, this was written in 1995, and looking stuff up on the internet was pretty new back then. Jesse says, the internet? And Cassidy explains, oh, that Cy is a computer whiz kid too. Talented boy we've got here. Now, since they are in New York City, and I guess this is Jesse's first time in the Big Apple, he wants to see some sights. He says, I've never been to the Empire State Building. Cassidy laughs and calls Jesse a freaking tourist. Over at the police precinct, we see those two cops we met earlier, John Toole, the doofus, and Paul Bridges, the dirty, hairy type. John is trying to question this one suspect, but is not really getting anywhere, so Paul grabs the suspect, and he turns on the photocopier machine and starts smashing the suspect's head into the photocopier and making the suspect give up the name of his supplier on the spot. John can't help but be impressed with his partner's work, as this is a gold bust and it's not even their case. The two of them got the information they need. They walk their suspect over to the holding cell, and as John makes his way back to his desk, he overhears all the other cops talking. The cops go on about how amazing Paul is and his various escapades in his past, and they make fun of John and say he only exists because Paul won't wear a bulletproof vest. They also refer to John with various derogatory names. Well, Paul and John have been assigned their new case. They are to look into this Reaver-Cleaver guy, and then they decide to do a little investigative work tonight. Back over to Cassidy and Jesse, they are heading up to the top of the Empire State Building, and Cassidy asks Jesse, why aren't you using your power to, get us stuff? You could have walked us into the Ritz-Carlton and got us a couple of suites we could be staying in rather than the small places we're at now. Jesse says it wouldn't be ethical to use his power to do that. He says, I'm looking for God because he deserted his creation, and I plan to bring him to book for that little transgression, and I want to confront him and hear his answer to that charge. He has an obligation to do right by the world and the people in it. If he quits and runs, he ain't facing up to his responsibilities, and I figure if I start abusing my gift on people just to make life a little bit easier, who am I going to be to talk about responsibility? So I gotta use the power right. Cassidy asks, so do you reckon that his creation and all these good people living on it are worth the time and effort you're expending on their behalf? And Jesse replies, matter of fact, Cass, yes, I do. As Jesse and Cassidy arrive at the top of the Empire State Building, they look into the New York cityscape. Jesse comments that it is pretty amazing. It looks like every goddamn movie he's ever seen of the place. Standing up here, a view like this, you get the feeling you can do anything. Cassidy says that's the feeling he had the first night he was up here, the night they opened the building. Jesse asks, no shit. How old are you, Cassidy? Cassidy replies that he's the same age as the century, mate, meaning he was born in the year 1900, so at this point in time he is about 95 years old. Cassidy says it's one of the many advantages of being a vampire. I got perfect vision, nose like a bloodhound, takes 5 seconds to run the 100. I can drink 50 pints and walk a straight line and kick the shit out of Mike Tyson while I'm doing it. And I'll show you something else. Cassidy then stands on the fence And he announces to everybody, "Oh God, I can't stand it any longer. The blood, the killing, the pointless butchery, let it end here." And he jumps off. But he just grabs onto the side of the building and tells Jesse, "Fooled ya." We jump across town to the apartment of Paul Bridges, super cop. Paul gets a strange phone call on his answering machine that says, "Hello, Detective Bridges. Do you want to do it again?" Paul then sobs. So clearly there is something more to this Paul Bridges than there seems on the surface. Issue 6, Naked City Part 2, New York's Finest. Jesse and Cassidy spend the rest of their night drinking at some bar playing pool. When Jesse heads back to the hotel they're staying at, he hears Tulip talking on the phone through the door. Tulip's talking to whoever hired her to do that contract hit. Well, apparently the target is still alive. Tulip can't believe that. She says, "I blew half his face off," but of course, she got the guy beside the guy she was supposed to get. Well, she tells the guy on the phone, "Look, I'm not coming all the way from New York back to Dallas just to finish this job." Now, while Jesse is eavesdropping, a woman with a cart walks by and says, "Excuse me." Tulip overhears the woman saying, "Excuse me," and she theorizes that Jesse is listening in on her call. So she's gonna hang up the phone, but before she does, she tells the guy on the phone, "Well, it's a big city, McAvoy. You want me? Let's see you find me." She hangs up. She then sneaks over to Jesse and opens the door, and Jesse falls through it because he was leaning right up against it. And Tulip exclaims, "Aha, I knew it, you were spying on me. You got some nerve, Jesse Custer." And Jesse tells her, "You kidding? You say I have some nerve? Who's gonna put a bullet in your head? Whose face did you blow off? Who did you miss? What job? Who is McAvoy? What the hell are you, some kind of contract killer?" They talk a bit, and Jesse tells her to grow up. I mean, when are you gonna stop playing games and admit all you wanna do is go to bed with me? And Tulip says she'd sooner have sex with Cassidy. They argue a bit more, and Jesse eventually leaves her hotel room. And when he does, John Wayne is in the hall and tells Jesse, "Nearly there, pilgrim." We jump over to the police officers, John Toole and Paul Bridges. We see that Paul is pretty homophobic. He tells his partner, "I'll tell you, Johnny, this street makes me want to puke. Faggots everywhere, Jesus. Ought to organize a call." John says they're not hurting anybody, Paulie. The two drive away. We see that freelance journalist Cy Coltrane watching them from the street. The two cops eventually arrive at an apartment, the wife of a new victim of the Reaver-Cleaver killer. She received a package with blood dripping through it, and her husband has been missing for 2 days, so she phoned the police. Paul Bridges looks at the package in her apartment that arrived for the woman, and it appears that the Reaver-Cleaver killer sent her husband's scrotum in the bag. Now we see Jesse and Tulip. They're walking down the street. They're talking about their relationship. Jesse wants to go back to being romantic with Tulip, but Tulip is having none of it. They do have a playful back and forth though, and Jesse tells her, "You ain't smiled all day, you know that? How about smiling for me just once? Just remind me what it looks like." Tulip replies, "You bastard," but she can't help but crack a small smile at Jesse's charm. Back at the police precinct, John gets a call on the phone. The Reaver-Cleaver killer phoned him and proves it is him by saying some information only the cops know for now, and it hasn't been mentioned anywhere in the press. So John tells one of the other cops to go tap his phone right now. He's got the killer on the line. The other cop doesn't believe John though and just wants to eat his sandwich. No matter anyway, the killer doesn't stay on the phone line long. He just says, "I just wanted to establish that I'm on the level for when I call again. Bye for now." We jump over to Cy Coltrane's apartment, that freelance journalist friend of Cassidy's. Cassidy's staying here. He invites Jesse and Tulip inside. Cassidy explains that Cy went out to grab some beer. He'll be back in a few moments. Jesse and Tulip, they went sightseeing all that day, and Tulip comments, "Jesse is such a goddamn tourist." Jesse retorts, "Hey, I ain't ashamed of it neither. Times Square, Battery Park, Statue of Liberty, she was something." Cassidy says, "Listen, Sai was asking if this stuff about sightings of God was for you and not for me, so I just went ahead and owned up to it. I told him that you lost your faith and wanted to talk to someone who had really seen God and not just read the Bible. Don't worry about it though, we've been friends for ages. I met him at Woodstock when he was only 16 years old. Just then, Sai returns home with some beer. He overheard the last bit of their conversation, and he joins in and he was going to explain how he and Cassidy met. He says that he was at Woodstock and he took the brown acid and he was tripping hard. He's wandering up this hill. He's freaking out of his mind. He wanted to puke so bad. And what does he see? He sees Cassidy get shot in the face by a Hell's Angel. Cassidy jumps in on the story and says, "The guy said something about the Pope, so I pissed on his Harley. I always get Catholic on heroin." Sai continues, "Cassidy gets up, minus his handsome face, and he busted this prick's shotgun over his head, and he bites the guy's throat and starts drinking him. Then Cassidy dumped his body and he comes over to me, and I'm so out of it, and I'm trying to explain what's going on, and I just say, Brown." Cassidy gets the idea though, and he sits on that hill beside me with no face on his skull and talks me down from the worst trip of my life. So after this reminiscing, they get to talking for a bit, and Sai eventually explains the only lead that he has on God is this guy in Greenwich Village named the Big Man. He's like a weird character. He lost his sight in an accident. He still gets about fine, no dog, no white stick, just walks around and never hits a damn thing. He says God guides him. Going blind put him in touch with his maker. He's got quite a following. Jesse asks, when can we go see this guy? And Sai says, tomorrow. So it appears Sai has came forward with some good information, perhaps. Over at the police precinct, John Toole is getting shit from his boss because this Cy Coltrane reporter has an article in Newsweek with all the details of their case on the Reaver-Cleaver killer. John doesn't know how that's possible. Neither of them talk to the press. He theorizes maybe this Cy followed them. The boss says, if Paul Bridges had met him even briefly, he would have noticed the son of a bitch trailing you a mile off. You missing him I could believe, but not Bridges, who I can't help but notice isn't here today. John explains that Paul called in sick today. John's boss tells him to get out of here. John heads back to his desk, and he gets a call from the Reaver-Cleaver killer. The killer tells John, "Good morning, detective. Yes, it's me again. I'm sorry to note that Detective Bridges is ill today, but on the other hand, he won't be there to detract you from your moment of glory. I've come to a decision about what I've been doing, and I wanted you to be the first to know. I'm on the ground floor of 315 West 45th Street, and detective, I've got a lot to say for myself. Bring a big SWAT team." So the Reaver-Cleaver killer is calling the cops over to his house. We jump over to Sai. Sai is driving Jesse and Tulip to the apartment of this guy named the Big Man, the one he told Jesse about earlier. Sai says he's gonna wait in the car as this big man doesn't like him because he wrote a story about him. And Tulip says that she needs to sit for a while, so she's just gonna stay in the car with Sai. So Jesse is gonna go meet this guy by himself. Jump over to Cassidy. He is staying at that Sai's apartment, checking out his books and his food. He goes to the fridge and sees something sketchy and says, "Oh fuck." Back to Tulip and Sai. They are waiting in the car. They get to talking about Cassidy, and Sai says, Cassidy apparently has a girlfriend in San Francisco, you know. Tulip is a little surprised to hear that, and Sai says, you thought his only interest in women was dietary? Yeah, I thought so too at first, but I don't think Cassidy's condition has had much effect on his overall lifestyle. He's got the same urge as most of us do, it's just he's a little more inclined to indulge them. Tulip says, well, we don't drink people's blood. And Sai replies, true. Not saying he's a saint, but I never saw him kill and drink anyone's blood who wasn't gonna die anyway, or who didn't deserve to get it one way or another. Sai asks Tulip how she's feeling. Tulip says she's okay, I guess, a little thirsty. Sai tells her, take a look in the glove compartment. He's gonna take a look in the back seat, see if he has a Snapple or something for her. Tulip asks, "Oh, I don't see anything. Do you have any luck?" And Cy replies, "You bet." And he stabs Tulip in the hand with a knife. Issue 7, Naked City Part 3, N.Y.P.D. Blue, the final issue in this volume. We see Cassidy is still in Cy's apartment. Cassidy looks inside Cy's fridge and sees all these dead human body parts. Cy is the Reaver-Cleaver killer. Cy phoned the police and told the SWAT team to come to his apartment. We see that the police have arrived outside and are on the loudspeaker, yelling at whoever is inside to throw out any weapons and come out with their hands in plain sight. Cassidy can't believe it. Cy set him up to be the killer. Cassidy opens the curtain a little bit to peek outside, but it's daytime and the sun burns his face a little. Jesse heads up to the apartment of the big man Cy told him about. Jesse knocks on the door and a man opens it and asks, "Can I help you?" And Jesse says, I'm looking for the big man." The man at the door says, "Oh, I know who you're talking about. Come on in. I didn't know he'd sent for a fourth, but we're having the hardest time trying to keep him happy." Jesse's a little confused. We see on the street, Tulip has the knife in her hand, and Cy is talking to her. He tells her, "I'm sorry, Tulip. This must be a terrible shock to you, and there's worse to come, I'm afraid." Cy confesses to being the serial killer, the Reaver-Cleaver. He says it's the best exclusive story he's ever got. He says, "There's no big man upstairs. I just made that shit up. Your boyfriend is walking into the home of Detective Paul Bridges, who you might remember is supposed to be on the trail of the killer." Why have I done this? I went looking through various databases for religious phenomena, and what I found was an APB in the FBI's computer for a Jesse Custer missing since a mysterious explosion killed his congregation in Anvil, Texas, as well as subsequent going-ons that resulted in the death of several dozen civilians and law officers. So I put 2 and 2 together, and I got reporter delivers dangerous fugitive to hero cop. Reporter then above suspicion in any investigation following discovery of several bodies in his apartment. Dangerous fugitive's girlfriend too dead to say different. Bodies in reporter's home put down to unidentified killer who burst into flames while resisting arrest there. "I've been staying with my folks in the Bronx," said reporter. "Little did I know this madman was turning my home into a slaughterhouse in my absence." Tulip asks him, "Why are you doing this?" Cy answers, 2 years back, I was driving home drunk when I ran over a guy. I got out to help him, but I saw I'd killed him, and it was 4 a.m., no one around. I got back in the car and drove like hell, and it was 5 minutes before I realized I was laughing fit to bust, cause I'd gotten clean away with it. So I began seeing what else I could get away with, and it just got funnier each time. Why? You expecting some crap about getting raped by my dad, or being a wolf that preys on sheep like humanity, blah blah blah. Anyway, don't scream or the cops will come and they'll get Jesse anyway, and I'm gonna go tell Bridges about his lucky break. Then we'll head up to my folks' place and I'll get him out of the freezer, and then I'll show you how much fun serial killing can be. Back to Jesse upstairs. He thinks he is in the apartment of this big man, the guy Cy was lying to him about, but instead he is in the apartment of Detective Paul Bridges. We see that Paul, even though he was bashing homosexuals on the street earlier, he is secretly a closeted homosexual into a weird bondage fetish. Jesse sees Paul and starts backing out of the apartment. Paul gets out of the restraints he is in though and tells Jesse, "Hey, get back here. He's the police." And Jesse jokes, "Is this what they call deep cover?" The two of them start trading blows. Back over to Cy's apartment, the SWAT team is about to move in. Cassidy is searching frantically around the apartment, wondering what he is going to do. He is worried that they will bring him outside and that he will burn up in the sun. Cassidy's continuing searching, and eventually he sees a big bayonet knife on the wall, and he grabs it and he stabs himself with it. Finally, when the SWAT team busts into the apartment, they see Cassidy there with the knife stabbed in through his neck, and they just assume he is just another dead body. Either way, John Toole's boss compliments him for the good work. She says, "Well done, detective. It's your case. You uncovered the killer's hideout. Well done. Now all you have to do is find the son of a bitch." John Toole, once he leaves the apartment, starts driving away from the scene. He now knows that the apartment belonged to a reporter, Cy Coltrane, and Cy Coltrane is now the #1 suspect. As John is driving, he tries to phone into his partner Paul Bridges' apartment, who called in sick today, but when there is no answer to his partner's phone, he starts to get concerned that maybe Paul is in danger. If he's home, why isn't he picking up the phone? So John starts driving as fast as he can, and he gets into an accident. A truck hits his car, and it rolls. Back to Tulip. She is still trying to remove the knife from her hand that is stuck to the dashboard. We see over in Paul's apartment, Jesse and Paul are fighting. The two gay prostitutes that Paul hired are trying to leave, and Paul yells at them and says, "You guys ain't going anywhere. This guy has seen enough to ruin me." Just then, Cy, the reporter, walks into Paul's apartment. His plan was to go upstairs and try to get Paul to arrest Jesse. And Paul recognizes Cy and says, "Jesus, you're that reporter. Listen, I know this looks weird, but what are you doing here?" And Cy says, "I'm doing my civic duty, detective. I'm helping you to apprehend a very dangerous criminal." He says this as he puts his gun into Jesse's mouth. Just then, John Toole shows up at Paul's apartment. He must have ran here from his car crash. He yells, "Freeze!" Now John, he begins narrating to us, the reader, and he says, "I called backup from a payphone, but I knew they'd never make it in time. I was ready for a slaughterhouse when I kicked open the door." Paul tells his partner, "Johnny, listen, it's not what it looks like." John just ignores the sexual hijinks for now, and he says, "Paulie, this guy's the killer. You should have seen his apartment." Coltrane put the gun on the floor, and just as John is trying to apprehend Cy, John slips on something, probably lube or semen, and he falls and drops his gun. John narrates, "You don't want to know what I slipped on. Suffice it to say, I screwed up for the last time." Coltrane held all the cards. The unluckiest cop in the world got himself and his partner killed. Or I would have if the cavalry hadn't shown up. Tulip arrives up in the apartment with the gun in her purse, but she's a little woozy from losing a lot of blood earlier from the knife wound to her hand. Cy tries to shoot at Tulip. Tulip ducks and fires back at Cy. Cy, out of bullets, tries to reload. Jesse, though, now free, punches Cy in the face and using the word power, he tells Cy, "Fucking die!" And Cy does. He can't disobey Jesse's word power, and Cy drops dead to the floor. Jesse, he moves over to grab Tulip, who is still woozy from all of her blood loss, and he begins to carry her to leave the apartment. John Toole points his gun at Jesse and has questions for him and says, "We need to talk downtown." Jesse, though, using the word power, tells him, "Don't point that gun at me, now give it here." John gives Jesse his gun, and Jesse tells the cop to give him his phone number. He tells him, "I'm gonna give you a call in a day or two. I have a favor to ask, and you're gonna do it, like it or not. But it ain't my style taking something for nothing." So Jesse shoots Cy in the head with John's gun and tells him, "You're a hero, congratulations." This way, John can take credit for killing this serial killer. Jesse then leaves with Tulip. The 3 gay prostitutes that Paul hired also leave, and Paul and John talk. John asks his partner, "Correct me if I'm wrong, but don't you hate gay people?" And Paul replies, "I do, Johnny, I do." He then goes on to explain how it was no longer just enough to be this tough or macho guy. He wanted to be even more. He tried to take it out on the scum on the street, but he realized what he really wanted was to take pain, not just hand it out and One night he saw those 3 guys and he wanted to. Then he just starts crying and he says, "I think I'm gay." John replies, "Are you sure you're not just fucked in the head?" We jump over to Cassidy down at the morgue. He wakes up from the body bag that he was put into, and he leaves the morgue. Before he does, though, he bums a cigarette from the worker down there. A few days later, we see Jesse meeting John Toole on a park bench. John Toole narrates that he went along with the story, playing the hero cop that saved his partner. No one would dispute it, so he figured, why not? Jesse asks John if he made the call he asked him to. John says, "I did. I phoned Agent Dennings, he's the FBI agent, investigating the Anvil disaster. Anyway, I told him we fished a 2-week-old corpse out of the Hudson with teeth matching the records that they faxed us, so that seemed good enough for him. So you're officially dead, Reverend." So Jesse used his word power on John to make him do this phone call for him. John tells Jesse, "That's quite a body count they've linked your name to, isn't it?" And Jesse says, "The only man I ever killed was that Cy Coltrane." And John replies, "Right. Oh, I nearly forgot. Denning's office had several calls from a woman saying she's your grandmother. Very anxious to know your whereabouts," he said. "So it might be nice if you gave her a call." Jesse starts sweating it, though. It appears his grandma is not someone he wants to see or talk to. Later on, Jesse and Cassidy are hanging out at the bar and walking the street. Tulip is recovering in the hospital from her blood loss. The two of them are going to go their separate ways soon. Cassidy apologizes for introducing Jesse and Tulip to Cy, and Cy turned out to be nuts. Jesse says not to worry about it. No way you would have known. Jesse and Tulip, their plan is they're going to head back south once again. Tulip has to take care of some business in Dallas, probably related to that contract hit. And Jesse says he has to take care of some stuff as well. Cassidy says he won't be going with them. He thinks he's just gonna take it easy for a while, but he gives Jesse a phone number that he can be reached at if they want to get in touch. It's a San Francisco phone number. The two of them shake hands and head on their separate ways. Now, John Toole, for taking Cy Coltrane down, got promoted to sergeant a month later, and then lieutenant the following year. The year after that, he lost both his arms in a horrific glazing accident. Paul Bridges left the force. Cassidy ended up traveling west, but not before stopping for a snack in his favorite Brooklyn neighborhood. We see Cassidy ready to drink the blood of some street gangsters. Meanwhile, Jesse and Tulip head on back to Texas. And that is the end of Volume 1. Alright, so that was Volume 1 of Preacher. Now, one thing I felt when I first read this series is that it's a lot to buy into the concept of this series. You got angels and demons and the Yadafi and the Seraphi and Jesse getting this crazy god power and Cassidy being a vampire. It's a lot to buy into, but if you do get into the concept, there's lots to enjoy here because I find the characters to be very fun and interesting. So Jesse being this preacher, this no-nonsense tough guy, Cassidy being this vampire that's been alive for 100 years almost, Tulip being this contract killer, all very interesting people. The Saint of Killers, this unstoppable force, just very fun to see him. He's like the Terminator. Nobody can do anything to him. We have crazy characters like Assface, which is just kind of fun. He seems very random right now, but you'll grow to love him as the series goes on. So I think there's a lot to like here. There's lots of interesting mystery. So where has God gone to? I want to learn more about this Saint of Killers guy. What's the deal with heaven and hell? What's the deal with some of these other things that have been teased, like this Grail organization? How do they come into it? So lots of cool stuff set up in Volume 1. And I think we had the setup volume, and then we had that whole serial killer volume, which was a nice little fun side adventure. Now, some of the negative things in this opening volume, though, and I always feel this with Garth Ennis, and the same thing with his Boys series, is that he really pushes the envelope a lot, and it can be really fun, but then some of it feels kind of just random and unnecessary. So there's lots of sexual stuff in here for no kind of reason. For example, this John Toole, this police officer, we learn he has one testicle. How did that change the story? It didn't. It didn't change the story at all. Paul Bridges, why is he this homophobic dude that's has a weird bondage fetish? That was completely random. You could have taken that out and the story would have gone the exact same way. So, kind of weird to have that stuff thrown in here, but he always keeps it interesting, Garth Ennis, when he puts those weird stuff in. But on the whole, I did enjoy this opening volume, and I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Thank you all for watching, and I will be back in the future with Volume 2.